Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of India's World with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Ashraf Ghani, Afghanistan's president, visited the embattled southeastern city of Ghazni a week after the Taliban launched an attack and infiltrated deep into the key provincial capital. The 5-day battle with the Taliban in Ghazni killed at least 100 members of Afghan security forces and 35 civilians before calm was restored on Wednesday, while a UN report quoted unverifiable numbers that put the civilian death toll at more than 200. Elsewhere in Afghanistan, a suicide blast in a mainly Shi'ite area of Kabul killed at least 48 people on Wednesday in a wave of attacks that have killed hundreds of civilians, soldiers and policemen over recent days. On this edition of India's World, we will take a closer look at the internal problems of Afghanistan and what it means for the region and the world. Joining me on the program today are Shiv Shankar Mukherjee, former ambassador, Professor Sreeram Sundar Chaulia, Dean, OP Jindal University, and Rana Banerji, former Special Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. You know, Afghanistan has been reeling under a wave of attacks, and there have been multi-pronged attacks. On the one hand, you have the Taliban. On the other hand, you have the ISIS, which has claimed several attacks in Afghanistan as well. How much of a problem is this really as far as the security forces and the government in Afghanistan is concerned?
Well, on the face of it, I think you really can't have a worse scenario. The ISAF, the NATO forces, who have been supporting this entire process of establishing some sort of stability in Afghanistan, which basically means having a government in Kabul that actually, to a substantial extent at least, rules Afghanistan. And there's some semblance of governance and the rule of law. And to my mind, what your report the introduction just mentioned about Afghanistan reeling under this spate of attacks from the Taliban, from ISIS, and so on, shows that the objective is about as far now as it was right at the beginning. I mean, you have, after the US-led NATO forces now have been in Afghanistan for the longest conflict engagement since the Second World War, much longer than even Vietnam. And yet, at the present moment, the Taliban, which was dislodged from Kabul after the, after 9/11 and the aftermath, still control very large parts of the country. They strike at will in the heart of Kabul. They are, taking military action, which is almost what experts like Rana will call theater action, not just guerrilla warfare. So more and more you have these occasional reports about the peace process, about the triangular thing between China, Pakistan and Afghanistan, about the quadrangular peace process, the UN-led, sputtering sort of initiatives, and they all seem to be coming to naught.
Yeah.
We also hear about moves being made by the Americans to talk to the Taliban, to, from all accounts, and these are all very confused accounts, I must say, there is a realization dawning that you cannot eliminate the Taliban, and therefore there will have to be some kind of power sharing agreement. But power sharing with whom? The good Taliban, the bad Taliban? I mean, something that has been totally discredited, and yet talks are, I believe, currently some talks have been held in Doha again between the Americans and the Taliban. So, I mean, my comments are confused, and because the situation, I think, is completely confused. I think Afghanistan is as far away from peace as it was right at the beginning of this conflict.
Right.
The insurgency, the Taliban, the terrorist forces seem to be as strong as ever, and this whole business of the foreign forces training, I mean, Britain is now sending 440 more troops. The intention is to shore up and train and empower the Afghan security forces to progressively take over the task of policing the nation, but it's not happening.
But for how long? That's really the point, Mr. Banerjee. Several peace attempts have been made. Several people have, tried to get a piece of the pie really in Afghanistan, but yet none have succeeded. The problem continues to persist. What is the issue really?
Well, the issue is not to withdraw in a manner which will leave the perception of a US defeat after so many years. And the talks with the Taliban are intended to somehow soften this blow and bring them into some format of power sharing, limited power sharing, maybe to begin with first with area governorships in the south.
But is that such a good idea?
Ultimately, you see, what would the talks of reconciliation be about otherwise? They now realize that they have to have a political process in place. And it is for this reason that in the last 6 months, there have been several meetings with two-point personnel from the US, retired Special Forces officer called Chris Kolenda, and Mr. Robin Rafael, who have been shuttling between Doha and USA and Kabul now. In July, they had 2 visits to Kabul and then back to Doha. One doesn't know what are the precise modalities of the suggestions that have come up and with what level of the Taliban leadership, because at all times the Doha office is not sufficiently empowered to speak for all factions of the Taliban. But as regards the ground situation in various parts of Afghanistan, what happens is whichever factions of the Taliban are being engaged in talks, in battlefield clashes, the Taliban have been able to maintain their cohesion and spring surprises like they did in capturing Ghazni for a while. And the traditional response has been to beat them back somehow and then restore control in the cities. So this process is going on for various period of time without the legitimacy that the Ghani government needs to acquire.
Indeed. Of course, the Taliban problem persists. Taliban is a major issue in Afghanistan, Professor. But then you have the issue of the Islamic State as well, where they go out, carry out attacks, kill innocent students, innocent children. How do you deal with such kind of a problem? They're trying to engage with the Taliban, but what do you do with a rogue group like the Islamic State?
Frank, the ISIS has never been amenable to negotiations because it's a very, very extreme hardline ideology. And I think the anti-Shia violence especially is troubling because in the past there have been instances where, for example, the Hazara community, which is one of the important ethnic groups, which has a Shia majority, they used to be attacked, but it was not primarily because of by virtue of being Shia. But now the number of mosques and civilian targets the ISIS has been taking out. Initially, I think the big blunder that many governments have made is to underestimate ISIS and to say no, this is a Syrian or an Iraqi thing, and we don't have an ISIS here at home. And this is simply some splinter group of Taliban masquerading as ISIS. But what that does is it gives them, the Americans carried out some bombing campaign in Nangarhar in the east, saying that this is the ISIS headquarters and now we finished it. But then you have attacks in Kabul, you have attacks in Faryab, you have attacks in Herat in the west. So these are traditionally, supposed to be areas where Taliban or some other ethnic, warlords have been controlled. So where is ISIS coming from suddenly? And the ideology is distinct, right? I mean, they also want a so-called Sharia rule state, but something that will be far more diabolic than even what Taliban want. So I think this is complex civil wars that drag out for a long time. What happens is, even if one faction is willing to go for a peace talks and maybe a negotiated settlement, something that is spawned out of it continues to resist, and then you have a new generation of these mujahideen that continue to fight. So
does that mean peace is a far cry?
It is difficult because see, initially the Taliban seem to be in control of the insurgent space, and now you have this new force that sometimes even clashes with Taliban in many parts of their country for turf war. So, and it's not clear that the Pakistanis, which usually have been directing the Taliban, from Quetta and from the ISI, that they have any control over the ISIS groups either. So, in this situation, ISIS, is not really a classic state-sponsored terrorist group. It is inspired by, what is happening in the Middle East, and what they consider to be some kind of a global purification campaign against apostates within Islam. So, I think you look at the way they have just recently attacked on a mountaintop, where young students were doing tuition. I mean, the brutality, the sheer, and Taliban, by the way, are trying to clean up their image little bit because they are interested in power sharing, it seems. And that's why there is at least some talks going on. But ISIS is not interested in any power sharing. I think their logic is we either rule completely or we, keep on killing. And so I think now we are in a situation where all the countries in the region have to take it in. The Russians have been saying for a long time that there is an ISIS problem and we need to think about it. And therefore, I think we need to look at a possible configuration where there are some elements of Taliban interested in peace, Afghan state which is tottering because of internal, internecine feuds among politicians and poor governance. I mean, look at the Gardes, I mean, the Ghazni situation. I mean, the police and the military are asking desperately for reinforcements from Kabul. Defense Ministry is saying we are sending them in 1 hour, 2 hours, nothing turns up, and people are being held up as sacrificial lambs. The same thing happened in Kunduz also. So the weakness of the Afghan state is allowing, and the paralysis of governance and the factional infighting is what is creating the space for ISIS or for newer groups to keep on coming up and continuing this war endlessly.
Right. Talking about the ISIS and talking about Taliban, Ambassador, who's the bigger of the two evils? I mean, the situation seems to be extremely dire in
I think if
in
you're looking at
Afghanistan.
the political fallout of the insurgency, and as far as the Afghan people are concerned, it doesn't really matter. They are both forces that are using extreme kinds of violence to destabilize Afghanistan for whatever objectives they have in mind, which is basically power. So as far as the Afghan people are concerned, the Afghan nation state is concerned, both are equally dangerous. To do a kind of micro-analysis of this may be profitable as a theoretical exercise, but in actual fact, as far as Afghanistan is concerned, any peace process will have to identify who are the stakeholders that should be part of this peace process. Because
and who's going
even
to
an insurgency is...
No, but who's going to identify these stakeholders?
Well, precisely. As you see in the Middle East. I mean, one of the very few statements that Donald Trump made in his campaign, which was quite accurate really, is because there's no point talking about who should we support in the Middle East because we don't even know who the protagonists are. In Afghanistan, I mean, the factionalism which was pointed out by my colleagues within the insurgency is there. But if you are talking of a peace process, we have an international force that is trying to help the Afghan government and the Afghan security forces and trying to put them in a position where they themselves will be able to govern, and these people who have been bogged down in virtually an endless war are able to withdraw with a semblance of dignity without losing face, as Rana pointed out.
Right.
Now, so the larger danger posed by ISIS is another matter, but as far as Afghanistan is concerned, the forces that have to be controlled and brought to the table either through pressure or through a combination of pressure and incentives, which basically means some kind of power sharing, are the Taliban and whatever other forces are now aimed against the state. There is a state in Afghanistan which the world recognizes, so do we.
Right.
And there are people waging war against the state. They may be fighting amongst themselves once in a while, but they are waging war against the state. That is the problem of starting any peace process with even a semblance of success, and that, I'm afraid, as yet doesn't seem to have happened. Doesn't seem to have reached even a beginning of a peace process.
Right. Mr. Banerjee, several world governments have also started talking about dealing with the Taliban directly as well. There are talks that India too should open up the channel with the Taliban, and maybe start dealing with them directly. Is that something that we should explore? Is that something that we can do?
It can certainly be done, but so far the Indian official position has been that the Taliban or the Afghan Taliban are too unreliable a commodity to respond to some of the feelers that have been coming from time to time. So we haven't yet responded, whereas various other countries now are establishing contact, including the Afghan government of the day, as also the Americans now. And of course, the Pakistanis have been for a very long time, had their favored proxies in this regard, whom they would like to ensconce in some sort of power sharing to the exclusion of forces which are less inimical to India. So we have to give more thought about this issue, whether we should engage and with whom in the Afghan Taliban. In this regard, I don't think we have thought this through yet.
Afghanistan is very key to India in our scheme of things.
Yes.
So what role do you foresee for India in Afghanistan?
Well, India so far has, projected on focusing on infrastructural development activities which the government of the day in Afghanistan has wanted us to take on, apart from a little bit of military aid. So we have, focused on areas like power development, education facilities, medical health development projects. Now other small projects, the dam, the Salma Dam, now the Shatut Dam is being considered on the Kabul River. So these are projects which are popular in Afghanistan, they are doable, and they also involve less risks during implementation for our forces who have been, or our sort of engineers, workers who have been subjected to all manner of threats and have lost lives there. So that has to be also factored in while we take on these works. So as far as possible, our focus has been on developmental work as wanted by the people of Afghanistan, and this has brought us a lot of goodwill as India in Afghanistan.
Right. Professor, as far as the region is concerned, how important is it to have a peaceful Afghanistan for the region?
Frank, it cannot be overestimated. The Pakistanis just have elected a new prime minister, and the battle for Ghazni that just happened, according to the Afghan government, out of 400, 500 Taliban who have been killed, 70 or more were Pakistani citizens. And the Afghan intelligence says that Lashkar-e-Taiba, which has often been a thorn in the flesh for us in India, had actually sent fighters alongside the Taliban to raid Ghazni. And if you see especially the eastern part of Afghanistan that borders the tribal regions of Pakistan, is where, it's the Durand line is porous and the militants keep moving with the ISI supply chain. And so you can see that for the region, and Imran Khan, the new prime minister, is going to be so weak because he himself beholden to the military and the ISI that he will deny that they have any hand in this problem. So in a way, it's going to be continuation of the same old game. So Pakistan destabilizes Afghanistan for its so-called strategic depth or other reasons, and in return, the Afghan problem comes back to haunt Pakistan because there are militants moving in both directions. And Pakistan will remain in the grip of extremism and violence. So second thing, Chechens, Uzbeks, all kinds of fighters are now again in a way returning to Afghanistan because the war in Syria and Iraq, as you know, have wound down. A lot of these former ISIS or other Mujahideen groups, some of whom who come from Central Asia, are returning. And now you have a situation, some of them are going to want to come back and regain their foothold in Afghanistan, either with ISIS or some faction of Taliban. So now you have a situation where the entire region is again at risk. I mean, Tajikistan, there is an ISIS branch that has recently announced itself by killing foreigners. So always the externalities of Afghanistan have been felt around, it's reverberated. And now it's really a matter of, we often talk about regional solutions. The Chinese should be involved, the Pakistanis should behave and restrain themselves. The Americans have played a double game. They're not really interested in fortifying the Afghan state fully. For example, they have not given them a proper air force to defend themselves. They're reliant on the Americans. And so we keep saying the regional solution. But I think we have now reached such a bit of a crisis point that if we don't actually create some kind of a regional conference mechanism, there is a Heart of Asia mechanism to stabilize Afghanistan. It meets once a year, but it's at a ministerial level. We have never really gone beyond talking in the Heart of Asia process to come up with a formula for regional stabilization. But if it will be too late, because right now they are saying 56% of the Afghan territory is only controlled by the Afghan state. That itself may be, I think, an exaggeration, because once you move out of the highways and the urban centers, they don't have control.
Right.
So it's dwindling and it is crumbling, and it is high time before it collapses, or recedes into complete, like just controlling Kabul and nothing else. We need to come up with some kind of a regional force to do something. India is averse to boots on the ground. We are risk averse, and that's understandable. We have paid a price for it in the past. But I think now we need to come up with some kind of a regional grouping, both diplomatic as well as military. Otherwise, the game is going to be lost.
Right. Ambassador, your thoughts on India's role in Afghanistan really, and what we should be doing, and also a word on Pakistan, because they have a new prime minister. Is anything going to change? The professor says nothing's going to change.
Well, I agree with him as far as Pakistan is concerned. Nothing is going to change because the the rulers, the outfit in Pakistan that creates the policy as far as India and Afghanistan and these big ticket questions are concerned has not changed. Imran Khan is not going to run the Afghan policy, neither is he going to run
Any
the
foreign
India
policy.
He may run the municipal dog catching policy or whatever. But as far as that is concerned, it is the military establishment, the deep state in Pakistan that continues to call the shots as far as that is concerned. And they, and that will change when they themselves will change that policy. And he's quite right. We don't see that changing. One of Pakistan's objective is to keep India out, apart from whatever else they want in Afghanistan. I do not really believe in all this talk about Pakistan needing a government in Afghanistan which is under its thumb, because it gives them this phrase which I think is quite meaningless, strategic depth. I agree with somebody who said that. I mean, you're talking as though they need some parking space for their tanks or something. But they do want a sway in Afghanistan. They do not want an India-friendly Afghanistan. And so what do? There's two choices that Professor Chaulia mentioned. One is boots on the ground. I don't think we should go that far, because it's simply not possible for us to sustain that. If the strongest superpower, if the sole superpower in the world, with resources that are multiple times higher than ours, along with soldiers and resources from a large number of other countries, is bogged down there for now 18 years, then, I mean, the imagination boggles as to what we would be facing if we decided to, add a little bit or even provide some kind of substantial military presence there in combat terms. I don't think that's realistic at all. What is absolutely correct is that, in fact, I'd like to underline what Mr. Banerji said, that the goodwill that is there in Afghanistan for what India has done in the development area is very real and very substantial. I mean, I can say this without fear of contradiction. If you look at the reports, from my colleagues that have served in Afghanistan, from all sorts of other reports, there is an immense amount of goodwill for India. That
How do we leverage that investment?
There's the point. I mean, you see, since we in India love to criticize ourselves, and that is not a bad thing. The criticism is that, look, we are creating all this goodwill, but it's not resulting in immediate strategic security gains for us in terms of some kind of leverage against Pakistan and what they try to do to cause harm to India. Now, here again, I think we need to stay the course. I think we should continue to do what we have been doing in terms of our developmental work. The goodwill accumulates. It accumulates over time. If at some time in the future there will be peace in Afghanistan, or something resembling peace and not the kind of situation we have now, it is that goodwill that we will depend upon for whatever we want to do in the region.
Right.
So the fact that this enormous amount of goodwill that genuinely exists, it not resulting in Afghanistan sort of becoming an ally of India versus Pakistan and that sort of thing, is a misguided criticism.
Right.
So I think we should continue on the path that we have taken so far. Plus, as far as the military part of it is concerned, in terms, one thing that is forgotten about, and I speak from my Africa experience, the country that provides the finest military training to foreign military outfits is India. I have seen the Brits in South Africa. I have seen other countries. It's, they throw a lot of money. For instance, I'm sure, without having been there, that the US efforts in training the Afghan soldiers to take over the role of that they are supposed to do competently and professionally, is a whole lot of technology and money being thrown at things.
Right, and not the actual expertise.
So what we have already started doing in a small way, providing military training and so on and so forth, that is something we can expand very profitably.
Right. Yes, Professor.
I just want to add one. Civilian capacity also. You see, unlike the Europeans who have often taken on these things, I think we have greater ability to understand the problems of developing countries, because governance failure is at the core of a lot of these problems in Afghanistan. And you know, when in our university, for example, we have trained dozens of Afghan civil servants, and they always complain about the political bosses, the ethnic manipulation and the division, the warlordism, and how, you know, Dostum doesn't work with Ghani, Ghani doesn't work with Abdullah, and how the whole thing is a mess. But the question is, what can they at the lower level of administration do to solve basic problems of justice and public works that people need? Because of the lack of those, you know, people are turning to Taliban, people are turning to ISIS, young people have no opportunities. India, you know, as a developmental state and as a democracy which is also a relatively poor country, we can impart a lot of the training and skill transfer that is needed at the intermediate and lower levels of the Afghan state. So state building, especially at the political level and the administrative level, we should take on as a great mission, because the military itself will be insufficient to hold on to the territorial gains that whatever the Afghan National Army does.
Indeed. All right. Mr. Banerji, close the show for us with your concluding remarks on the way forward as far as Afghanistan is concerned.
Well, the way forward is likely to be incremental in various ways. Now the Afghan government is now preparing to have Walisi Jirga and district council elections in October, 20th October. They may not be able to hold the district council elections for lack of sufficient number of eligible candidates who are coming forward. So the district council elections may be postponed to April 19, to be held simultaneously with the presidential elections. Till then, you see, all these processes will have to be incremental. The talks with various factions of the Taliban, which are being engaged in with limited amount of success, progress. Similarly, the disarming of some IS groups in the north, in Jawzjan recently, the Qari Hikmat, he was killed. The successor elements of Qari Hikmat, Maulvi Habib and Niyamat, they have recently concluded a peace deal with the Afghan government. Now Dostum has come back, and there is going to be a temporary peace between Dostum and Atta. How this translates in political terms for overall support to the Ghani Abdullah led national unity government remains to be seen. Even Pakistan, to a certain extent, international pressure is forcing it to change its, approach to at least the perception that it is instigating the Taliban all along. What the Pakistani army is now telling its foreign interlocutors, even to Ashraf Ghani, Bajwa is saying that do not blame us for the military failures of others. We are, to a certain extent, we can control the Taliban, but we can't control them totally. So what is happening is in spite of us. And as far as the porous border is concerned, for ages, you see, Pakistan has offered, relief and recreational, support for hospitals for the injured Taliban, etc. So they can't stop them overnight. And there may be Pakistanis who are going across, as Professor mentioned. LET has for years done battle inoculation of their cadres in support of the Afghan Taliban. So these type of linkages will remain. At the same time, there will be tenuous erosion of these, because some of the spillover IS elements are also hitting Hazaras or Sunnis inside Balochistan. The Pakistan army is going to take action against them. The
Right.
Chinese are suspicious that any Uyghurs can be given, safe havens in parts of Afghanistan or even Pakistan. So they are sensitive about Uyghurs being associated with the IS. So this will lead Pakistan, put Pakistan under some sort of pressure to sort of dissociate. So in this manner, incrementally, the process will continue till the elections. There will be violence. Taliban, to make their presence felt, will have occasional suicide bombings, attacks on voting registration centers, etc. But at the same time, they are not totally rejecting the peace feelers.
Sure.
So this is likely to be the scenario in the days to come.
All right, very well summed up by all the panelists. Thank you to all of you for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. We'd like to hear from you as well. Do share your feedback with us. indiaasworld.feedback@gmail.com is our email ID. You can also tweet to us using our Twitter handles at FRP09 and at Rajya Sabha TV. That's it on this edition of India's World. See you again next time.